So welcome everyone to this session on decentralized energy, and obviously welcome to the group of startups. We have Astrid and Michael from Camus, we have Jojo from Electron, and we have Forrest from Shifted Energy. So let's get started. Make sure you ask your questions, but otherwise I'll just keep asking them. So before we talk about decentralized energy, I wanted our audience to continue to learn a bit more about you all and about your startup. So how about we start by each startup sharing some of the big wins or something exciting that's been happening in your world lately. Camus, how about we start with you?
Sure, I can go ahead. Well, let's see. We are in the process with current utility customers, and we have a pretty big utility project in the process of kicking off right now. So we're pretty excited to work with our new investor-owned utility partners in addition to our public utilities. That's kind of a big step for us. So I'm happy to share that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll talk more about that. Jojo, what about you? What are some exciting things been in your world lately?
Thanks, Megan. So we've got a live local marketplace up and running in the Orkney Islands in the UK that is enabling consumers with cars and electric heaters to absorb the excess wind power. And we are launching 2 more of those types of markets in the UK in the first quarter next year. So it's catching fire.
That is awesome and very exciting to hear. Thank you. And Forrest, what about you? What's been going on in your world?
Oh, yeah, it's been a little bit nutty. I also have a 6-month-old daughter, so I haven't been sleeping much as well. Jojo, your future. We are in due diligence. We're closing a smaller fundraising round, which we're really excited about. It's going to help us make some real critical hires going into the fourth quarter. We probably embargoed, but I mean, it's midnight in New York. We've won the Urban Futures Lab prize yesterday. It's a New York-based incubator prize, and so we've been tracking electrification in New York, and we think that it's going to be a really nice market for us moving forward. And we kicked off a project in Canada, which we're really excited about because it's the first time that we've seen outside of Hawaii where a utility is wanting to use grid edge assets to perform multiple grid services at the same time. And so doing load build, energy storage, load reduction, and fast frequency response, all potentially with the same asset on the same day. And so we're really, really excited about that.
That is fantastic. You have got lots of things going on there, Forrest. Now, just to everyone listening in, feel free to ask your questions. Just pop them in the chat. I'll go through and make sure they get asked. Otherwise, as I said, I've got a great list of questions. So for all of you, if we're imagining the energy system of the future, what does it look like? And where does decentralized and centralized energy fit in that view? So I am going to hand over to Jojo first for this question. And feel free to jump in. It's a casual chat. It's all good.
So, I mean, we started Electron 5 years ago because we were kind of seeing this shift from a few large ahead of time energy trades to this kind of, reciprocal kind of like optimized world of kind of transactive power. I think it's probably happened a little slower than we all hoped. I think what we're seeing now is kind of policy change around the edges, driving network utilities to start increasing those kind of local energy markets. And I think that's the kind of first phase of this transition. But ultimately, I think we're going to see these kind of layered markets where one electron isn't worth the same as another electron, which they are on today's traded markets. But, an electron's worth more depending on where it's produced, how it's produced, the carbon content, and everything like that. And you can start layering on those different value attributes. And that's really how you fund and incentivize this kind of net zero landscape.
Yeah, I'm hoping that it's slow at the beginning and then it picks up speed. I guess we'll see what happens. And Forrest, what about you?
I would echo what Jojo said. I mean, similarly, we started our company in Hawaii. Hawaii was the first state in the US to have a 100% renewable energy portfolio standard. Our inspiration was we saw that there was going to be a chasm in who could participate and who couldn't. And if you go to any state, almost any country, and you search for what kind of rebates are available, it's always going to be single family home, solar, electric vehicle, batteries. So if you're lower on the socioeconomic scale, if you're a renter, you're just not going to be able to participate. And we found that electric water heaters was the kind of gateway drug for us to gain access and build more equity into this future. And I think, to Jojo's point, we were ahead of ourselves for many years. And in some ways, I think COVID, we lost last year. And in that year, climate change is so much more visceral. And I have seen our market completely change almost overnight. And this year is 100% different than last year. And I think the intestinal fortitude to be more equitable in that transition exists. And we're starting to see that in policy. We're starting to see that out of utility commissions. And so when I think about the future, I think that it's a future where anybody in our community can participate. And I think that's really important, that it's going to take more time. It's going to be slower. You're going to have to be more patient with it, but we have to do it.
Thanks, Forrest. And what do you think? I think it's really interesting that last year, which, could have been a hold year, let's put it, for so many people, but it seems to have picked up pace. What do you think it was? What were the things that started flipping the switches?
I think it was just right in front of our face. Like, you couldn't ignore it anymore. And then you transition into this year with fires and floods and hurricanes and then just the everything that's wrapped around that, and the chasm that is existing between who have and have nots. I think it's just become, in Hawaii we have this word called kuleana. Kuleana is inherent responsibility, and we have a responsibility as global citizens to react, and I think that's happening. I think after last year, people have dug in and are committed to seeing change happen at a quicker scale.
Great, thank you for that. And for the Camus team, Astrid and Michael, what do you think it looks like in the future?
Just to pick up on the thread of things that we've seen across the past year, I think we've also seen sort of the darker side of a potential future on the grid, as we look at failures in Texas, in California, in New Orleans, in the US, and bushfires in Victoria, flooding, etc. There's both I think a great deal of hope in terms of some of the changes that we're seeing, greater interest in decarbonization, real acceleration of adoption of renewables, really starting to look at the turn down of coal on the grid. But there's also some cautionary tales, to Forrest's point about that kind of equity on the grid. Here in California, we're definitely seeing the sort of the potential downsides of a big shift towards distributed energy. As the grid gets less reliable, people are investing in batteries and kind of effectively dropping out of the community of the grid in real time. We're also seeing really accelerated community impacts from very dramatically increased unreliability here. Many communities in California are now seeing weekly power outages, even well ahead of public safety power shutoff season. And I think we have a kind of narrow window to figure out the mechanisms by which we create incentives for consumers broadly to participate in the collective economics of the grid. Because if we get to a point where you're really seeing like immediate day-to-day stress, you maybe almost already missed the window. They'll start to buy batteries if they can afford it. They'll be suffering the impact of lost productivity, like sitting at home in heat waves, etc. If they can't. And so making sure that we really do have those mechanisms in place, and that those are really in place at the system level to really value the flexibility that customers can provide, and use that to add economic value and kind of balance and enhance the economic value of renewables. think is a really critical part of the transition that we're going to go through in the next few years. Not opportunities ahead of us, but we're gonna have to do some work to get there, because the default case is probably people just kind of investing for themselves in solutions to work for themselves and their family if they can, and being left behind if they can't.
Yep. Thank you very much. Now we've got some questions coming in from the audience in the Q&A section. So Paul at Directional, who's one of our EnergyLab mentors. Hi, Paul. Your services mostly need partnerships with retailers to be enabled. How willing and proactive do you find your retail partners in your countries, the UK, the US, etc.? Any hands up to take that one first?
Happy to. I think I mean it's spot on, right? There's a kind of key role of the retailer, or I'd say the distribution utility, to enable these new kind of more equitable arrangements. So, and I mean, while there are people there who have these amazing ideas for how you can reform the grid, you also do need kind of regulatory imperatives or incentives for them to get kind of broader support up to TopCo. So it's really about finding one or two of those parties who really, really want to drive that value and kind of set the new high water mark. But it looks slightly different in different countries. So we're operating now in 3 countries. And in the UK, the thing that really gets everyone is curtailment. Last year, at a national level, we turned off, actually at a national and local level, probably almost $1 billion of renewable generation, because it was all at the wrong time in the wrong place. We didn't do anything about that. And that's kind of at the top of people's list now. And it's quite kind of easy, you know, it's kind of win-win-win to team up with a utility to use that power better and stop overloading the grid. Whereas when we started working with London Hydro in California, they didn't have any grid constraints, but they were essentially pioneering this because they wanted to change the way they engage with their customers. They could see this huge kind of EV uptake, solar uptake coming down the line, and they wanted to be able to send carbon and kind of peak demand type price signals. And we're just kind of in early stages in working with Silicon Valley Clean Energy in California, and that's a distribution utility. That's a community choice aggregator who's not for profit, who's trying to drive the lowest cost of power and the lowest carbon content for their consumers. So that there's different alignments and motivations in different countries, and I think that the hardest thing for us and the kind of IP behind it is trying to find what the golden thread is across those different markets, such that you can support any type of trading arrangement.
Thank you, Jojo. Anyone else want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I agree. I think the intersecting value streams is critical, and then by region, it's going to be different. So everybody knows the utility, it's going to move slow, right? And it's going to be time consuming and sometimes painful. And you know, we have a customer in Arizona, a utility in Arizona, and they went straight to multifamily buildings for their distributed energy projects, which was nice because that was the kind of the ethos of the company. We don't always have agency where our technology is deployed. We have a customer in Portugal that is really keen to build customer solutions to help with cost savings on energy bills, and so that's coming straight from the utility. An area of the market with distributed energy that we think is super valuable is actually with large scale property managers, because there's multiple value streams there. So there's additional revenue, of course. There's maybe keeping tenants happier, satisfied. There's some bill reduction opportunities. But with machine learning, we can provide things like maintenance alerts for leaks and thermostats or elements that have gone bad that need replaced, and you do that ahead of their maintenance team. And so I think the way that scale happens is we have to be more open to finding that alignment that Jojo speaks of. And in some ways, I think being really open to partnerships is the way to do that, in my viewpoint.
Great, thank you. We might move on to, we've got a couple of other questions in there. So we might go to Camus for this one. It's a bit controversial maybe. Do you think we can completely go off the transmission grid using only renewable energy sources and storage systems? From John.
I think practically speaking, that's probably neither practical nor cost effective. What you get from the connection to the transmission grid is network scale backup in the case of the kind of tail events when you don't have good production for renewables within any particular area, and the ability to share good production to others who are in those kind of tail event situations at other times. And so I think that, practically speaking, could any particular customer drop off the grid by themselves, put in a bunch of solar, put in a bunch of battery, as long as it's relatively sunny? Probably, except for the days when it's maybe smoked over or fogged over or clouded over. And then you're pretty grateful to have the grid as a backup. Same's true for a city or a region or a state or a country. Most of the time, sure, but the cost of those tail events is really, really high. So I think one of the things that we've seen as we look at recent kind of climate-linked disasters is both the opportunities for more local resources. Like, you would definitely be able to reduce the risk from freezes or heat waves or kind of power underproduction events by having additional local resources that could provide more local backup. But you can also conversely really reduce the risk of those events by having a lot more connectivity to other regions that have different weather. And so, as we're looking towards a more uncertain future where climate adaptation is a really big part of that, I actually think the answer is really, it needs to be all of the above at different times and for different reasons. And I don't think that makes distributed generation or distributed resources less valuable. I think we're really just talking about the solution set that can give us the resilient energy system that we need.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
If I was just going to build on that for 1 second, I think in some of our customers, we see them being at like 120% of their load capacity in the daytime coming near term. And in fact, they're increasing their ability to provide electricity locally. And certainly we work with a lot of rural electric cooperatives, and way out there at the end of the feeder, they are fully local during the daytime, and they are looking to do things with batteries for resilience and services out there. So I agree with Astrid, and in some of these places and some of these people we're talking to, it's almost as if the transmission grid or the G&T provider is no longer the primary; it's becoming the secondary, depending where you are in these grids we're working with now. And I consider that it'll be fractal from the smaller grids to the larger grids over time.
Thank you for that, Michael. Forrest, did you want to jump in there, or was that me imagining things? Magic, it can happen. Okay, we've got another question from the audience. This one is from Blair Pritchard. One challenge in scaling DER businesses has historically been death by pilot with utility customers. How are startups transitioning from pilot scale to repeat paid businesses? I'm sure this is one that is close to all of your hearts. Jojo, how about we go to you first?
I think it's a reality of our space that utilities will do pilots before they buy for new things. So until there is, and I think it's everyone here's ambition to standard set and make something so kind of commonplace you can pick it up and roll it out again. But you've got to do pilots at first. I think, and actually we've had many conversations about this, even kind of internally amongst this group. Our approach is we don't do kind of mini unfunded pilots. We do a kind of proof of concept at scale with appropriate stage gates, with at such a kind of price and level that the utility's already decided this is strategic. So it's already gone up to the board, and they've already said this is something we want to do. It's not just someone wondering how to spend their budget on another end that's not going to continue. And then I think there's a huge role. I mean, you've got so many extra stakeholders in this industry. You've then got to go and share what you've done with regulators, governments, other kind of regulated utilities. But I mean, there are also huge forums for that in the energy space in the way that there maybe aren't to the same extent in other industries. So it's a blessing, it's a curse. It's tough for investors to kind of show that pilots lead to recurring revenue, but I don't think utilities are going to skip this step until they've seen it happen over and over again. So you design for it, you're happy, you can fund some of them through kind of the innovation funding available, and that's how we work.
Fantastic. Forrest, what about you?
I don't think I could add anything more. Jojo nailed it. The only thing I would maybe add is programs like this, where your partners are utilities and they get to spend a little bit more time with startups to understand just how critical the need is to move from pilot to scale in a timely manner, and do it in a way that makes sense, and that actually helps the startup. And so I think the more utilities can participate, the better, and that knowledge is transferred outside of our somewhat maybe echo chamber that we live in.
Yeah, great, thank you for that. And Astrid or Michael, did you go for it?
Yeah, I would just add that we've been really fortunate to avoid pilots in pretty much all of our large-scale deployments today. And the main reason for that is that we were primarily with smaller utilities. And as Jojo describes, we also have a kind of full scale and phased engagement model where you can kind of start with data only engagements that are kind of inherently low risk and kind of scale up from there to larger and more potentially impactful technology deployments that might actually do like live control or other forms of kind of load shifting. But this has let us kind of jump past the pilot phase and straight to subscription and recurring revenue for the majority of our early customers. And that actually made a really big difference to us, especially as we're kind of getting started, going through early funding rounds, those kinds of things. It's not necessarily possible with larger utilities, so it doesn't really exactly answer your question, except to say that I think what the process is give us the ability to demonstrate results really quickly, and in some ways to use kind of those initial utility engagements themselves as pilots that let us kind of prove technology in one space and take them to another more quickly. So that's I think it is a reality that you need to do something in one place before you do it everywhere. But there's a few different ways to do that, and I think being sort of thoughtful about that's helped us out.
That's great. I think that's really helpful to any startup as well who feels like they've been stuck in that pilot spiral. That's really beneficial. Now, keep your questions coming. Feel free to chuck them in the chat box, or you can go to the Q&A. I will find them in either. Speaking now about your startup and what you do, when it comes to decentralized energy, how are you helping with those challenges for energy companies, businesses, and potentially households? So, Forrest, we might start with you.
Yeah, maybe I think best example is maybe our example here at home. We're an island grid. There's no interconnect. We have high penetration of renewables on our grid, and so we have many issues that you don't see currently in other locations. But I think that you will see as more renewables, as penetration starts to increase. So, there's not enough chemistry in the world that you're going to solve all of your load shifting energy storage with batteries alone. And so distributed energy resources is the absolute way to be able to move forward with that. And I'm going to pull on this thread over and over again. In our 2.5 megawatt project with Hawaiian Electric, 95% of our installs are in low-income rental communities. And there's just no other way for those folks to participate. And what we've been able to do is partner with our third-party energy efficiency administrator. So when we go into a building, we don't just offer a bill credit through the DER program, but we're also doing energy efficiency upgrades to the apartments, and it's all for free. It's part of their of the mandate to do that. And so I like to think of things as being as holistic and encompassing as possible. It's not always that way. But in many ways, it can be that we're solving for grid needs, but we're solving for societal needs at the same time.
Yeah, I think that sounds incredible, Forrest. I think democratizing access to all of those great things is so important. Astrid, how about yourself?
One of the biggest things that we do is give utilities the tools to look at and kind of manage their distributed resources in the context of their whole grid. And that's really important to the there's kind of any number of technical solutions that will give you like really great tools for managing distributed resources, and those are really important. But one of the things that utilities do tend to struggle with is really putting that in the context of like information about their core system, right? Like, you know, congestion or transformer load at a particular point on the grid, historical peaks at a particular point, you know, places where backfeeds of technical concern versus where it's not, and where it's like just kind of a day-to-day thing. Utility really kind of needs to know both about those things as well as like what resources are available in that place and how might you use them. And it's really kind of putting those things together that we see being particularly powerful for utilities to kind of unlock the ability to really use those resources on a day-to-day basis and in practice. So I think it's really like that data context that has a lot of extra value.
Fantastic. And Jojo?
Yeah, just to really pick that up, it's exactly what Astrid and Forrest just said. I think like distributed energy resources are like the problem and the solution. But the problem when you've got no data on what they're doing and why and where they are, and you're getting grid congestion. But they're the solution when you can see what you need and you can communicate with, you know, those needs to those assets, and people like Forrest can control them to supply those needs, and to pick up on that kind of collective action theme. Like, this is an industry in which any action that someone with a flexible asset can take that increases the cost efficiency of either the grid infrastructure or how zero marginal cost power is being used nearby, like reduces costs for everyone. So it's really kind of and as we bring these new assets to market, and it just needs the kind of digital platforms that sit behind it, because optimization is a kind of multiples problem, which you can't do without digitizing your grid and your energy assets.
So true. Thank you. Now we've got another question from John. I might have to try and work around it. Are you having any solution for the mobile energy due to electric vehicle integration? There might be a word or two missing out of that, but let's just talk about electric vehicle integration in your solutions. Let's kick off with Forrest for that one.
Yeah, we're actually testing level 1 EV charging as we speak. It's actually really interesting. The load profile for an EV is very similar to a water heater. And so many of our algorithms that we were using for water heating kind of translated
Who would have
nicely.
thought?
Right. But then if you think about it, people come home and charge. People come home and take a shower and wash dishes. And so it is really interesting. So I have an EV with a level 1 charger. It has no internet connection or anything like that, but it participated in a fast frequency event 2 weeks ago in the middle of the night, and it was really cool. It stopped charging for 20 minutes during the event, and the randomized return, it came back on, and it charged for the rest of the night, and it finished at 6 a.m. And so we're pretty keen on this space because there is no smart level 1 EV charger at the moment. And this is a way that, and we think that's where a lot of the market is heading, just because it's lower cost. And so I love what Jojo said about it's a problem and a curse for DERs. I mean, EVs are the same way. You can't manage what you can't measure. And we do a really good job with being able to forecast what that load is going to look like over the course of 7 days. And because these are dynamic, you can't rely on a 7-day forecast, because the weekend is different than the weekday. And if you're looking at static energy in a dynamic universe, it just doesn't work. And so you have to have clever machine learning and real-time adjustment to what's happening, again, in real time with these dynamic assets. EVs are just another cod in that solution.
Thank you, Forrest. Now, you won't believe it. I can't believe how quickly this time has gone. We are 1 minute left to go. So I am going to wrap up. I could talk to you all for way, way longer than what we've had today. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you for the audience. Thank you to Astrid, to Jojo, to Michael and Forrest for being part of the program and joining this panel and sharing such amazing information. please get involved in these startups. You can certainly follow them. You can sign up to their newsletters. You can check us out at EnergyLab as well to keep up to date with what is going on. So I hope you've all enjoyed the conversation today. All the best, and thanks for joining.
Thanks,
Bye.
Megan.
Thank you all.